I never thought my own home would become my prison, that my son would stand silently by while my daughter-in-law locked me in a tiny back room each night, that they would forge my signature, steal my possessions, and plan to ship me off to a facility while they took over the house I'd spent 40 years building memories in. They thought I was just a confused old woman. They underestimated me, and when I discovered their plans to take everything from me, when I found that heartbreaking drawing from my grandson showing me trapped behind bars, something inside me that had been dormant for years suddenly awakened. They never imagined I would fight back. They never dreamed I would sell my house right out from under them. When they screamed, "Where are we going to live?" I looked my daughter-in-law straight in the eyes and said the words that would change everything. "You're not going to live here." But I never anticipated the shocking secrets I would uncover, or how my desperate act of self-preservation would lead to revelations that would shatter our family forever. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals come from those we love the most. If you enjoyed this story of an elderly woman reclaiming her power, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these emotional true stories to life. I used to have a house full of voices. The laughter of my son when he was little, the sound of the radio in the kitchen, the noise of the neighbor's chickens crossing our backyard. But that winter, the only sound I heard was the door to my room closing behind me, with a key. It all started slowly, like a disease that spreads through your body before you even know you're sick. I never thought my own home would become my prison. Never imagined my own flesh and blood would be my jailer. I'm Martha Davis, 73 years old now, though back then just 68. Young enough to take care of myself, old enough for them to call me confused when I disagreed. When my son, Marcus, brought his wife to live with us after losing his job, I said yes, like I always did. I'd raised him alone after his father died of a heart attack when Marcus was just 14. Our little house on Maple Street in Springfield wasn't much, but it was paid for. My husband had made sure of that before he passed, his final gift to us. "It'll just be temporary, Mom," Marcus had promised, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Just until we get back on our feet." Lauren seemed kind at first. She brought me tea in the mornings and asked about my flower garden. She even helped me with the dishes. But there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite read, like she was measuring everything, calculating. Then it began. So subtly I almost didn't notice. First, she took down my wedding photos from the living room wall. "They're collecting dust, Martha. I'll clean them and put them somewhere safer." They never reappeared. Then my kitchen utensils disappeared, the ones my mother had given me with the hand-painted handles. "They're old, Martha. We bought you new ones." Cold stainless steel things that hurt my arthritic fingers. My favorite chair by the window where I'd sit to read. Suddenly it was taking up too much space and moved to the basement. The quilts I'd made over the years, too old-fashioned for their modern tastes. I watched my life being erased piece by piece, and I said nothing. What mother stands in the way of her child's happiness? 3 months after they moved in, Marcus came to me with Lauren standing behind him, her hand on his shoulder like a puppeteer. "Mom," he said, not looking at me directly, "we've been thinking. The stairs are getting harder for you. We worry about you at night." I remember glancing at the stairs, the same 14 steps I'd climbed every night for 40 years. I'd never fallen, never even stumbled. "We think it would be better if you moved to the back bedroom," Lauren added. "It's closer to the bathroom, more convenient." The back bedroom, the tiny room where my husband used to keep his tools. No windows, just a small bed they'd squeezed in and a dresser too big for the space. "Just for a while," Marcus added quickly. "Just until we reorganize things." I wanted to ask what needed reorganizing in a house I'd kept the same for decades. I wanted to ask why Lauren's sister had been measuring my bedroom the day before. I wanted to ask why Lauren's mother had been talking about moving in to help with the old lady. Instead, I nodded and carried my small suitcase to the back room. Just for a while, I told myself. That night, I heard them laughing in what had been my bedroom. Through the thin walls, Lauren's voice. "See? I told you she wouldn't fight it. They never do. They, not I. They, like I was just one of many." one of a category, not a person anymore. For weeks, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I smiled at breakfast. I didn't complain when Lauren's brother started storing his motorcycle parts in my garden shed. I said nothing when Lauren's sister began staying over in the guest room 3 nights a week. I just watched and listened. I heard them talking about the house as if I wasn't there, about renovations they planned, about how, once we have full control, they could finally make changes. Full control. The words made my blood run cold. Then one night I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I turned my doorknob, but it wouldn't move. I pushed harder, thinking it was stuck. It wasn't stuck, it was locked. From the outside. "Marcus," I called softly at first, then louder. "Marcus, the door is locked." I heard hushed voices, footsteps, then nothing. I knocked again. "Hello? Can someone open the door?" Finally, after what seemed like hours, Marcus's voice came through the door. "Go back to sleep, Mom. It's the middle of the night." "But the door is locked. I need to use the bathroom." "You probably locked it yourself and forgot, Mom." His voice was strained, rehearsed. "There's a bedpan under your bed. Lauren put it there yesterday. Remember?" I didn't remember, because it never happened. "Marcus, please open this door. This is my house." There was a long silence. Then Lauren's voice, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Your house? Is that what you think? Who's been paying the property taxes for the last 3 years, Martha? Who fixed the roof last summer?" I pressed my forehead against the door, suddenly understanding what was happening. The taxes. I'd been struggling to pay them after my pension got cut. Marcus had offered to help. I'd been so grateful. "Go to sleep, Martha," Lauren continued. "We'll talk in the morning, when you're more yourself." I heard their footsteps receding, whispering as they went. And in that moment, as I stood alone in the darkness, something inside me, something I thought had died with my husband, suddenly flickered back to life. Rage, pure, cleansing rage. I went to the small window and looked out at the moon, the same moon that had watched over me my entire life, and I made a promise to it and to myself. "This isn't over," I whispered. "Not by a long shot." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the key turning in my lock. Lauren stood there with a tray, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Martha. I brought you some oatmeal. Did you sleep well?" Her voice was sugary sweet, but her eyes were cold as river stones in January. I nodded and accepted the tray, noticing how the oatmeal was barely warm and there was no sugar, though I'd taken sugar in my oatmeal every morning for 6 decades. I wondered if it was forgetfulness or punishment. "The door was locked last night," I said quietly, watching her face for her reaction. She tilted her head, her blonde hair falling perfectly over one shoulder. "Oh, Martha, you must have been dreaming again. Why would anyone lock your door? That doesn't make any sense." The way she said it, so practiced, so confident, made me question my own memory for just a second. But I knew what I'd felt, what I'd heard. I decided right then that I needed to start documenting everything. After she left, I searched my little room. Under the mattress wouldn't do. They changed the sheets once a week. Inside my slippers was too obvious. Finally, I found a small notebook in my old sewing kit and slipped it inside my pillowcase, right in the corner where it wouldn't be noticed during bed making. That day, I began my diary. Tuesday, February 12th. Door locked from outside at approximately 2:15 a.m. Marcus and Lauren both aware. Denied it happened this morning. For the next week, I documented everything. Who came into my room, what they said, what time the door was locked at night. It happened every night now. What time it was unlocked in the morning. I wrote down when Lauren's sister Melissa started bringing trash bags full of clothes into my old bedroom, and when Lauren's brother Keith moved his computer setup into my sewing room. Most concerning were the visitors, people I didn't know who would tour the house while I was confined to my little room. I could hear them through the thin walls. "This space would make a perfect nursery," one woman had said right outside my door. "Once we knock out this wall, the kitchen will flow right into the dining area," a man's voice had noted. They were planning, measuring, deciding. And I was just an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. One afternoon, while everyone was out, I discovered my door had been left unlocked. My heart pounding, I slipped out and moved silently through my own house, feeling like a trespasser. Family photos had been replaced with Lauren's taste in generic artwork. My china cabinet passed down from my grandmother was gone, replaced by some sleek monstrosity from one of those Swedish stores. In the living room, I froze when I saw a blueprint spread out on the coffee table. It was my house, but reconfigured. The little back room where I now slept was labeled storage. There was no room for me in their plans. With trembling fingers, I took a picture of the blueprint with my old flip phone, the one thing they hadn't taken from me yet, probably because they thought I couldn't figure out how to use it properly. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. That evening, I heard my grandson Michael crying outside my door. He was 4, such a sweet little thing with his father's eyes and none of his mother's coldness. I pressed my ear against the door. "But I want to see Grandma," he sobbed. "Why can't I see her?" "Grandma's not feeling well," Lauren said firmly. "She needs to rest. She gets confused sometimes, you know that. But I made her a drawing. I'll give it to her later. Now go wash up for dinner." I heard his little feet trudge away, and the sound broke my heart more than anything else had. They were cutting me off from my grandson, too. That night, lying in bed, I heard voices in the kitchen. I crept to my door and listened. "The lawyer says we need her signature," Lauren was saying. "If she's declared incompetent, we have to go through the courts, and that could take months." "But she won't sign," Marcus replied, sounding tired. "She's not as confused as you think." "She will if we present it right," Lauren insisted. "Tell her it's an insurance renewal or property tax papers. She trusts you, Marcus." My own son plotting against me. I felt sick to my stomach. "She raised me alone after Dad died," Marcus said quietly. "This house, it's all she has. And it will be all Michael has if we play this right," Lauren snapped. "Your mother has had this house for 40 years. It's our turn now. Michael's turn. Don't you want your son to have security? A real home, not that cramped apartment we had before?" There was a long silence. "Just get her to sign by the end of the month," Lauren continued. "She's confused enough. She'll trust you." I backed away from the door, my hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. I'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. They wanted my house. They were planning to take everything from me, legally or otherwise. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, going over every option. I could confront them, but it would be my word against theirs. I could call for help, but who would believe me over my own son? Who would take the word of a confused old woman? The next morning, I noticed the name of a law firm jotted on a notepad left on the kitchen counter when I was allowed out to use the bathroom. Bruckman and Associates. I memorized it, then slipped back to my room before anyone noticed. Later, as I wrote in my secret diary, I added, "I need to find the deed to the house. I need to know my rights. I need to be smarter than they think I am. Because the only thing worse than realizing your family is betraying you is letting them get away with it." Sunday mornings in my house used to mean the smell of fresh coffee, pancakes on the griddle, and the sound of old gospel music playing softly from the kitchen radio. This Sunday, I lay on the living room sofa with my eyes closed, pretending to nap, while Lauren hosted what she called her brunch club. 3 of her friends, all young women with expensive highlights and identical vocal patterns, sipped mimosas in my kitchen and spoke about me as if I were already dead. "So what are you going to do with her?" asked one whose name I couldn't recall. The her in question was me, of course. "We're working on it," Lauren replied, her voice lowered but not enough. "Marcus is handling the legal stuff. His name is already on some of the papers because of the tax situation." "And she doesn't suspect anything?" Lauren's laugh was like ice crackling. "She spends most of her time confused. Yesterday she thought it was 1985 and kept asking about Reagan. This was a complete fabrication. My mind was sharp as ever, and I despised Reagan back then anyway. Once we get the house," Lauren continued, "my mom can take the main floor, Melissa can have the upstairs bedroom, and we'll convert the dining room into a proper playroom for Michael." "What about Martha?" another voice asked. There was a pause that stretched just a beat too long. There's a nice assisted living facility about 40 minutes away. Very affordable. They have openings. My heart thumped against my ribs so hard I was sure they could hear it. 40 minutes away meant I'd rarely see Michael. It meant being surrounded by strangers. It meant giving up the home where I'd raised my son, where I'd nursed my husband until his death, where every corner held memories I couldn't bear to lose. Does she have money for that? Someone asked. The house will sell for enough to cover it, Lauren said casually, as if disposing of my entire life was nothing more than a real estate transaction. Plus, Marcus found an old life insurance policy his dad took out. It's not much, but it'll help. The life insurance. A small policy my husband had purchased to cover funeral expenses and help us adjust after his death. I'd almost forgotten about it. I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed, absorbing every word like a sponge soaking up poison. When they moved to the backyard to enjoy the unseasonably warm February day, I slipped away to my room without anyone noticing, or so I thought. That evening, Marcus came to my room with a plate of reheated lasagna. His eyes had dark circles beneath them and his shoulders slumped with what I hoped was guilt. You heard everything, didn't you? He asked quietly, setting the plate down on my nightstand. I considered lying, but what was the point? Yes. He sighed and sat on the edge of my bed. For a moment he looked like my little boy again, the one who'd come to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. Mom, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. You're planning to sell my house out from under me and put me in a home. He flinched, but didn't deny it. You need care, Mom. You're forgetting things. It's not safe for you to live alone anymore. I wasn't living alone until you decided I needed to be locked in this room, I reminded him. And I'm not forgetting anything, Marcus. You and Lauren are gaslighting me, making me doubt myself. But it won't work. His eyes widened at my use of the term gaslighting. I may be old, but I read. I know manipulation when I see it. Lauren says, I cut him off. Feeling decades of motherhood assertiveness returned to my voice. When did you stop thinking for yourself, Marcus? When did her words replace your own thoughts? He looked down at his hands. We need this house, Mom. Michael needs stability. The economy is terrible, my job prospects are limited, and Lauren's family needs a place to stay too. Her mom got evicted last month, and Melissa broke up with her boyfriend. They have nowhere to go. So this is about solving everyone's problems except mine, I said quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. You should eat, he finally said, standing up. I'll come back for the plate later. After he left, locking the door behind him, I pushed the food aside. My appetite had disappeared. Instead, I pulled out my little notebook and wrote down everything I'd learned. It was worse than I'd imagined. Not just Lauren, but her entire family planned to move in, and I was to be shipped off to some facility, out of sight and out of mind. That night, I made my decision. If they wanted to take my home, they'd have to fight for it. I wasn't going down without a battle. The next morning, when Lauren took me to my monthly doctor's appointment, the only time I was allowed out of the house anymore, I asked to use the bathroom at the medical center. Inside the stall, I pulled out the small address book I'd kept hidden in my undergarments. I found a payphone in the hospital lobby and made a call while Lauren was distracted filling out insurance forms. Brookman and Associates, answered a crisp voice. I need to speak with someone about elder rights, I whispered, keeping an eye on Lauren across the lobby. Someone discreet. The receptionist must have heard the urgency in my voice. Miss Brookman has an opening tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your name? Martha Davis. And please don't call to confirm. I'll be there. I hung up just as Lauren approached, her face suspicious. Who were you calling? Just checking my appointment for next month, I lied smoothly. The reminder card fell out of my purse. She seemed to accept this, though her eyes narrowed slightly. Back home, I waited until everyone was asleep. The house had a familiar rhythm at night. Marcus snored lightly around 11, while Lauren took sleeping pills that knocked her out by 10:30. By midnight, the house was silent. Using a hairpin I'd salvaged from my old vanity, I managed to pick the simple lock on my door, a skill my husband had taught me years ago, just in case. I moved silently through the darkened house, making my way to the basement where cardboard boxes of our family's history were stacked in forgotten corners. In the musty darkness, illuminated only by the small flashlight on my phone, I found what I was looking for: my husband's old document box. Inside were our marriage certificate, his death certificate, and, most importantly, the deed to the house and his will. With trembling hands, I also discovered a power of attorney document I'd forgotten about, one my husband had prepared, giving me full authority in case of his incapacitation. Clutching these papers to my chest, I wept silently in the basement darkness, surrounded by the remnants of my former life. These documents were my armor now, my weapons in a battle I never thought I'd have to fight against my own blood. As I carefully made my way back to my room, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. I froze, heart pounding. "Mom?" Marcus called sleepily from upstairs. "Is that you?" I didn't answer, slipping instead into the shadows by the kitchen counter. After a moment of silence, I heard him turn over and resume snoring. Back in my room, I hid the documents inside the lining of my winter coat, which hung forgotten in the small closet. Then I wrote in my notebook one simple sentence: "Tomorrow, I fight back." For the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. The path ahead would be difficult, but at least now I had a direction, and the element of surprise. The meeting with Miss Brookman went better than I could have hoped. She was a silver-haired woman about 15 years my junior, with sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. "What you're describing, Mrs. Davis, is elder abuse," she said, after I'd explained my situation, her pen tapping against her yellow legal pad. "Isolation, gaslighting, financial exploitation. These are serious matters." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and heartbreak, hearing my situation categorized so clinically. It made it real in a way I'd been trying to avoid acknowledging. "What can I do?" I asked, clutching my purse where I'd hidden the house deed and other documents. "They're planning to sell my house and put me in a facility, and I'm afraid they'll claim I'm not competent." Miss Brookman's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any documentation of your mental competence? Recent medical evaluations?" I nodded. "My regular checkup last month. Dr. Wilson said I'm sharp as a tack for 73. His words, not mine." "Good. And the house? Who owns it?" I pulled out the deed with hands that trembled slightly. "My late husband and I purchased it in 1978. When he died in 1995, it transferred solely to me." As she reviewed the documents, I stared out her office window at the Springfield skyline. How had it come to this? Sneaking around behind my son's back, consulting a lawyer about protecting myself from my own family. "Mrs. Davis," Miss Brookman said, interrupting my thoughts, "you're in a stronger position than you realize. This house is legally yours. They can't sell it without your signature, and any attempts to declare you incompetent would require medical evidence that, from what you've told me, doesn't exist." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a new kind of dread. So what do I do now? Go home and tell them I know what they're planning? They'll just deny everything. Miss Brookman leaned forward, her expression grave but kind. "I suggest something more decisive. Given what you've described, I'm concerned about your immediate safety. Do you have somewhere else you could stay? A friend, perhaps?" I thought about it. Most of my friends had either passed away, moved to be near their children, or were in assisted living facilities themselves. The curse of outliving your social circle. "No," I admitted. "But I do have some savings. Not much, but enough for a small apartment, maybe." She nodded slowly. "What would you think about selling the house yourself, before they can manipulate you into signing it over?" The thought hit me like a thunderbolt. Sell my home, the place where I'd raised my son, where my husband had taken his last breath, where every scratch on the hardwood and crack in the ceiling told a story of our lives. I don't know if I could," I whispered. "Think about it," she advised. "You could use the proceeds to secure your future on your terms, and there would be a certain justice in it." Justice. The word hung in the air between us. tempting and terrifying all at once. We arranged another meeting for the following week. Lauren believed I was at my water aerobics class, the one activity she still allowed me, probably because she thought I was too harmless, splashing around with other old ladies to cause any trouble. As I prepared to leave, Miss Brookman handed me her card. "Call me anytime, Mrs. Davis, day or night, and remember, you're not alone in this." On my way home, the taxi driver dropped me off a block away at my request. I needed those few minutes to compose myself, to put my confused old lady mask back in place before facing Lauren and her scrutiny. Walking slowly up the cracked sidewalk of Maple Street, I noticed things I'd taken for granted for decades. Mrs. Peterson's hydrangea bushes, now overgrown since her daughter moved her to Florida last year. The corner where my son had waited for the school bus every morning for 12 years. The oak tree my husband had planted the day we moved in, now towering over the yard. Could I really leave it all behind? I entered through the back door, hoping to slip in unnoticed, but the house was unusually quiet. Lauren's car was gone, Marcus's too. Even Michael, who should have been home from kindergarten by now, seemed absent. Taking advantage of the empty house, I decided to do something I'd been contemplating since discovering my room had been someone else's idea of my future. I would search Marcus's belongings. The stairs creaked beneath my careful steps as I made my way to what had once been my bedroom. It looked entirely different now. All traces of my existence erased and replaced with Lauren's sterile decorating taste. The floral curtains my sister had made me as a housewarming gift were gone, replaced by austere gray panels. My cherry wood dresser had been swapped for some modern monstrosity of white laminate. I opened Marcus's closet, feeling like an intruder in my own home. In the back corner, partially hidden by hanging clothes, was a cardboard box labeled simply "Old Stuff." I recognized it as the box where Marcus had kept childhood mementos and important papers. Inside, beneath yearbooks and participation trophies, I found a bundle of envelopes tied with a frayed ribbon. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized the handwriting on top. Marcus's messy scrawl, addressing a letter to me that I'd never received. With shaking hands, I untied the ribbon. There were dozens of letters, all addressed to me, none of them sent. The earliest was dated from 2 years ago, right around when Lauren had briefly left Marcus after a fight I knew little about. "Dear Mom," the first one began. "Lauren's gone. She took Michael and left last night. I don't know what to do. I miss you. I miss how things used to be between us before she came along." I sank to the floor, letter after letter revealing a son I barely recognized anymore. Vulnerable, lost, manipulated. He wrote about how Lauren controlled everything, how she'd convinced him I was becoming senile, how she'd isolated him from his friends. "Sometimes I look at you across the dinner table," one letter read, "and I want to tell you everything. But she's always there, watching, listening. I feel like I'm drowning, Mom, like I don't know who I am anymore." Tears streamed down my face as I realized the depth of manipulation that had occurred. Lauren hadn't just been isolating me. She'd been controlling Marcus too, driving a wedge between mother and son with expert precision. At the bottom of the box, something colorful caught my eye. A child's drawing done in bright crayon. It showed a stick figure with gray hair, clearly me, behind what looked like bars or a fence. Tears were drawn on the face, large blue drops falling to the ground. In a child's wobbly handwriting at the bottom, "Where are you, Grandma?" Michael had seen what was happening. Children often see truth more clearly than adults. As I carefully returned everything to its place, I noticed something else in the box. A checkbook I recognized as mine. I hadn't seen it in months. Lauren had offered to help manage my finances. I flipped through it and froze. There was a check stub for $5,000 made out to cash, allegedly signed by me. The signature was close, but not right. The M was too rounded, the T crossed too high. Someone had forged my signature. Putting everything back exactly as I'd found it, I crept back downstairs just as I heard a car in the driveway. My mind was made up. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about saving my son from whatever hold Lauren had over him. It was about my grandson, who missed his grandmother. Sometimes I realized you have to break something completely in order to rebuild it properly. By the time Lauren walked through the door with Michael in tow, I was sitting peacefully in the kitchen with a cup of tea, the perfect picture of a docile old woman with no idea what was happening around her. But inside, a fire had been lit that nothing would extinguish. I had a lawyer now. I had evidence of financial fraud. And most importantly, I had a plan. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of secret phone calls, clandestine meetings, and careful planning. Every time Lauren took me to my water aerobics class, I'd spend half the time in the pool and the other half in the recreation center's payphone, coordinating with Miss Brookman or Margaret Wilson, a real estate agent who specialized in quick, discreet sales. I found a potential buyer, Margaret told me during our third call. Elderly woman like yourself, looking to downsize but wants a home with character. She's willing to pay cash, though it's about 15% below market value. How soon? I asked, keeping my voice low, glancing nervously at the pool where my supposed classmates were doing gentle leg lifts. We could close in 10 days if you're serious, Margaret replied. But Mrs. Davis, are you absolutely certain? Selling a family home is emotional even under the best circumstances. Was I certain? No. Every night as I lay in my locked room, I'd stare at the ceiling and question whether I was making the right choice. But then I'd remember Marcus's letters, Michael's drawing, the forged check, the locked door. My certainty might waver, but my resolve never did. I'm certain, I said firmly. And I found an apartment too. Small studio in Bakersfield. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. What I didn't tell Margaret was that I'd chosen Bakersfield precisely because it was only 15 minutes from Marcus's workplace, close enough to maintain a relationship with my son and grandson if things ever improved, but far enough that Lauren couldn't just drop by unannounced. The hardest part was deciding what to take with me. 68 years of life doesn't pack easily into a studio apartment. Each night, after everyone was asleep, I'd sneak into different parts of the house and select one small treasure to hide in my room. My mother's thimble, the baby blanket I'd knitted for Marcus, the Christmas ornaments my husband had carved by hand, a few precious photographs. Everything else, the furniture, the appliances, the garden tools my husband had lovingly maintained, I would leave behind. Things are just things, I told myself. Memories travel with you. The sale was finalized on a Tuesday morning. I signed the papers at Miss Brookman's office while Lauren thought I was at a doctor's appointment. Miss Brookman had arranged for a medical transport service to take me to my appointment and then discreetly help me move my few belongings to my new apartment afterward. The funds will be transferred to your new account by this afternoon, Miss Brookman explained, handing me a set of keys. These are for your new apartment. The moving company will meet you there at noon. I stared at the keys in my palm, so small to represent such an enormous change in my life. What about the confrontation? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the part I dreaded most. Miss Brookman's expression softened. The new owner takes possession at 3 p.m. today. The sheriff will accompany her as we discussed in case there's any unpleasantness. I've drafted this letter explaining the situation to your son. She handed me an envelope. You can give it to him or leave it behind. Your choice. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Martha, she said gently, using my first name for the first time. What you're doing takes extraordinary courage. Remember that, no matter what happens next. The moving process went smoother than I'd expected. I had so little to bring. Just 3 suitcases and 2 small boxes. The movers looked confused when they saw how little there was, but they didn't comment. By 1 p.m., I was sitting in my new apartment, surrounded by bare walls and empty spaces that somehow felt more like freedom than emptiness. At 2:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was Lauren, her voice shrill with panic. Martha, where are you? There's some woman here with a sheriff saying she bought our house. What did you do? I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the tide of emotions threatening to drown me. It's not your house, Lauren, it's mine. At least it was until this morning. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. You sold the house?" Her voice was barely audible now. "Without telling us? Where are we supposed to live?" There it was. Not concern for me, not questions about where I was or if I was safe. Just panic about her own situation. "I don't know, Lauren," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Where was I supposed to live when you locked me in that back room? Where was I supposed to go when you forged checks in my name and planned to ship me off to a facility?" I heard commotion in the background, doors slamming, Marcus's voice raised in confusion, perhaps the sheriff explaining the situation. "You can't do this," Lauren was screaming now. "We have nowhere to go. My mother is moving in next week. My sister already gave notice on her apartment." "That sounds like a personal problem," I said, channeling Miss Brookman's matter-of-fact tone. "You should have thought about that before you started stealing from me and imprisoning me in my own home." "You crazy old bitch," Lauren spat. "You'll regret this." Marcus, talk to your mother." There was fumbling with the phone, and then my son's voice came through, breathless and confused. "Mom, what's happening? There's a sheriff here with eviction papers." My heart cracked at the genuine bewilderment in his voice. Despite everything, he was still my little boy, the one I'd nursed through chicken pox and taught to ride a bike. "I'm sorry it came to this, Marcus," I said softly, "but you gave me no choice. Check the box in your closet, the one with your old letters, the ones you never sent. Then decide if you still want to take Lauren's side." "What box? What letters? Mom, where are you?" Panic was setting in now. "We need to live somewhere. What about Michael? What about—" Lauren's voice cut in again, having apparently grabbed the phone. "You listen to me, you senile old—" "No, you listen," I interrupted, a lifetime of suppressed rage finally breaking free. "You tried to steal my home. You locked me in a room like an animal. You forged my signature. You turned my son against me. And now you have the audacity to ask where you're going to live." I could hear her sputtering on the other end, but I wasn't finished. "I don't know where you'll live, Lauren, and frankly, I don't care. But I can tell you one thing for certain. You're not going to live in my house anymore." With that, I hung up the phone, my hands shaking but my heart oddly calm. Through my new apartment window, I could see children playing in a small courtyard below. Life continuing, moving forward. I'd lost my home of 40 years. I might have lost my son, but for the first time in months, I'd found something far more valuable: my voice. The first night in my new apartment was the hardest. After the adrenaline of the day wore off, I found myself sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by walls that held no memories, in a neighborhood where I knew no one. The silence was deafening. I'd spent my entire adult life in a house filled with noise. First the happy chaos of raising a young son, then the comfortable quiet of growing old with my husband, and later the bittersweet solitude of widowhood. But this silence was different. It felt empty, hollow, like I'd been cut adrift from my own history. The studio apartment was clean but sparse. Just a small kitchenette, a bathroom with grab bars that reminded me of my age, and one main room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining area all at once. The beige walls were bare, except for a generic print of a beach sunset that had probably hung there since the Clinton administration. I unpacked my few belongings with methodical care, placing my husband's reading glasses on the small nightstand, arranging my mother's thimble and my few pieces of jewelry in a drawer. I hung the baby blanket I'd knitted for Marcus over the back of the only chair, a splash of faded blue against the neutral furniture. When everything was put away, which took less than an hour, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on as dusk settled over Bakersfield. Cars passed below, people returning home from work, to families who loved them, to houses filled with laughter and arguments, and all the messy, beautiful parts of life that I'd somehow lost. What have I done? I whispered to myself, doubts creeping in like the evening shadows. Had I overreacted? Had there been another way? The tears I'd been holding back all day finally broke free, streaming silently down my weathered cheeks as I mourned not just my house, but the family I feared I'd lost forever. I didn't sleep that first night. Every creak and hum of the unfamiliar building kept me alert, listening for dangers that weren't there. By dawn, I was exhausted but oddly calm. I'd made my choice. Now I had to live with it. The next few days passed in a blur of practical tasks. Setting up utilities in my name, learning the bus routes to the nearest grocery store, finding a new doctor, introducing myself to neighbors who smiled politely but seemed puzzled by the elderly woman living alone. I kept waiting for my phone to ring, for Marcus to call with angry accusations or tearful reconciliations, but it remained stubbornly silent. I'd left the letter miss. Bruckman had drafted on the kitchen counter of my old house, explaining everything: the locked door, the forged checks, the plans I'd overheard to put me in a home. I included copies of the letters I'd found. Marcus's unsent confessions of how trapped he felt. Part of me hoped he'd find them before Lauren could intercept them, that he'd understand why I'd done what I did. But as days turned into a week, then 2, with no word from my son, I began to accept that perhaps some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. It was on day 17 in my new life. Yes, I was counting, when the first anonymous call came. The phone rang just after 9 in the evening, startling me from a half-doze in front of the small television I purchased second-hand. "Hello?" I answered, my heart racing with sudden hope. "Marcus?" There was silence on the line, just the faint sound of breathing, then a small voice, barely audible. "Grandma!" My breath caught in my throat. "Michael, is that you, sweetheart?" The call disconnected immediately. I stared at the phone in my hand, unsure if I'd imagined the whole thing. Had that really been my grandson? How did he get my number? Was Marcus with him, or had the boy somehow managed to call on his own? I didn't sleep that night either, my mind spinning with possibilities. The next morning, I found a plain envelope that had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper, covered in the unmistakable crayon scrawl of a 5-year-old. It was a drawing, similar to the one I'd found in Marcus's box, but with one crucial difference. This time, the stick figure with gray hair wasn't behind bars. She was standing in what looked like a doorway, holding what might have been keys, and she was smiling. A huge, crooked smile that took up half her face. I pressed the drawing to my chest, tears springing to my eyes. Michael knew I was free now. Someone had brought him to my door in the night. Marcus, a neighbor who knew us both? I had no way of knowing, but the message was clear. I hadn't been forgotten. After that, small signs began appearing that perhaps I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. A potted plant left outside my door with no note. A children's book I'd read to Michael countless times, mysteriously appearing in my mailbox. Once, I even thought I saw Marcus's car driving slowly past my building, though it was gone before I could be certain. 3 weeks after moving in, I was returning from grocery shopping when Mrs. Abernathy from across the hall stopped me. "Someone was looking for you earlier," she said, adjusting her thick glasses. "A man. Said he was your son, but I told him I couldn't let him into your apartment. Building policy, you know." My heart skipped. "Did he leave a message?" "No, but he seemed worried. Nice-looking fellow. Kept rubbing his neck like he was nervous. Said he'd come back." I thanked her and hurried into my apartment, emotions churning. Marcus had come looking for me. After all this time, he'd made the first move. But what did he want? To reconcile? To demand explanations? To berate me for upending their lives? I spent the rest of the day alternating between anxious cleaning and staring out the window, watching for his car. But he didn't return, and by nightfall, I'd convinced myself that perhaps Mrs. Abernathy had been mistaken. It probably wasn't Marcus at all, just someone selling something or looking for a different resident. That night I dreamed of my old house, not as it had been in those final awful months, but as it was when Marcus was small. In the dream, my late husband was there, puttering in the garden while Marcus played with toy cars on the porch steps. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them, filled with a sense of contentment so profound it ached. "You did the right thing," my husband said in the dream, somehow beside me suddenly. "Sometimes the only way out is through the darkest part of the woods." I woke with tears on my pillow, but a curious sense of peace in my heart. The dream felt like forgiveness, like permission to move forward without the crushing weight of guilt. The next day, another envelope appeared under my door. This time, when I opened it, a small brass key fell into my palm. I recognized it immediately. The key to the antique writing desk my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary, the one I'd been forced to leave behind. Taped to a small note card was a message in handwriting I recognized as my son's. "Found this. Thought you might want it back. Some things shouldn't stay locked away." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall that had formed between us. And sometimes, when you've been staring at nothing but solid walls, even the smallest crack can let in enough light to help you find your way. The seasons changed. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing sweltering Bakersfield heat that made my small air conditioner rattle and strain. I established routines in my new life. Tuesday mornings at the Senior Center for watercolor classes, Thursday afternoons at the library where I discovered a book club filled with opinionated women my age, Sunday mornings at a small Methodist church within walking distance of my apartment. The crack in the wall between my son and me had widened slightly over time. After the key appeared, other small tokens followed. My mother's recipe box I'd thought lost forever. A wind chime that had hung on our back porch for decades. A photo album I'd assembled when Marcus was in high school. Each item appeared mysteriously under my door or in my mailbox. Never with Marcus himself. Never with any explanation beyond the occasional brief note. "Michael asked about this," one said, attached to a children's book I'd read to him hundreds of times. "Found in the attic," said another, paper clipped to my husband's old pocket watch. I treasured these breadcrumbs of connection, but they also frustrated me. Why couldn't Marcus simply knock on my door? Why these silent deliveries, these ghost visitations that acknowledged our bond without repairing it? From fragments of information gathered from neighbors who'd seen him or overheard his questions, I pieced together bits of their new life. They'd moved to a smaller rental house across town. Lauren's mother had indeed moved in with them, but her sister had gone to stay with a cousin in Ohio. Michael had started kindergarten at Washington Elementary, just 3 blocks from my apartment, which explained the occasional crayon drawings I'd find, always delivered when I was out at my predictable activities. On a humid July afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping to find Mrs. Abernathy waiting by my door, her expression unusually serious. "There's a young woman looking for you," she said in a low voice. "Not your family, I don't think. Says it's urgent. I told her to wait in the lobby." My heart fluttered with apprehension. Did she say what she wanted? Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. "Just that she needed to speak with you right away. Pretty thing, but looks like she's been crying." Curious and concerned, I made my way to the lobby, my canvas grocery bag still looped over my wrists. The woman sitting on the worn lobby sofa looked up when I entered, and I froze in place. Lauren. She did indeed look like she'd been crying. Her usually immaculate makeup was smudged, dark circles shadowing her eyes. The designer clothes she'd always flaunted were replaced by wrinkled jeans and a plain t-shirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail rather than the perfect blowout she'd maintained even during our house imprisonment. "Martha," she said, standing awkwardly. "Thank you for seeing me." I remained where I was, my guard immediately up. I wasn't aware I had a choice. "What do you want, Lauren?" She flinched at my tone, but didn't retreat. "I need to talk to you. About Marcus. He's not well." A chill ran through me despite the summer heat. "What do you mean, not well?" She glanced around the lobby. "Could we talk somewhere private? Please?" Every instinct told me to send her away, to protect myself from whatever manipulation she might be planning. But the mother in me couldn't ignore a potential threat to my son, no matter what had happened between us. "My apartment," I said tersely. "But I'm calling Mrs. Abernathy to check on me in 15 minutes if I don't come out first." Lauren nodded, accepting these terms without argument. Another sign that something was truly wrong. The Lauren I knew would have bristled at such distrust. In my apartment, I busied myself putting away the groceries while she stood awkwardly by the door, taking in my new living space with what looked like genuine surprise. "It's nice," she said, clearly struggling to find words. "It serves its purpose," I replied coolly. "Now tell me about Marcus." Lauren sank onto the edge of my sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. "He had a breakdown 3 weeks ago. Complete nervous collapse. He's been in Ridgeview Psychiatric Center since then." The carton of eggs I was holding slipped from my fingers, crashing to the floor. I barely noticed the mess. "Psychiatric? Why wasn't I informed? I'm his mother." "He made me promise not to tell you," she said, her voice cracking. "He was so ashamed. But yesterday he gave me this." She pulled an envelope from her purse, holding it out toward me. "He said I had to bring it to you, that it was time you knew everything." With trembling fingers, I took the envelope. My name was written on the front in Marcus's handwriting, but it looked different, shaky, uncertain, like he'd struggled to form the letters. "I'll leave you to read it," Lauren said, rising. "My number is inside if you want to talk after." "Wait," I said as she moved toward the door. "Why are you doing this? Why now?" She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Because I was wrong about you. Because I've lost everything that matters. Because Marcus might listen to you when he won't listen to me anymore." After she left, I sat for a long time with the unopened letter in my hands, afraid of what I might find inside. Finally, gathering my courage, I broke the seal. 8 pages of handwritten confession poured out, the writing sometimes neat, sometimes nearly illegible, as if written during different mental states. Marcus wrote of his life with Lauren, how what had begun as love had twisted into control and manipulation. "She isolated me from my friends first," he wrote. "Then from you. It happened so slowly I barely noticed. She would point out flaws in people I cared about, plant seeds of doubt, suggest they didn't really care for me. By the time we moved in with you, I was already a shell of myself, afraid to contradict her for fear she'd take Michael and leave again." He described how Lauren had convinced him that I was becoming senile, pointing to normal signs of aging as evidence of mental decline. How she'd manipulated him into thinking the locked door was for my safety. How she'd forged my signature on checks and documents while he looked the other way, too weak to stop her. The night you left, I found the letters in my box, the ones I'd written when she abandoned us the first time. I'd forgotten how clearly I'd seen her then, before she came back and re-established her control. Reading them was like hearing from a stronger version of myself, a man who could still recognize what was happening. The most devastating part came toward the end. When you sold the house, something in Lauren broke. The mask slipped completely. She became someone I didn't recognize, screaming, threatening, blaming everyone but herself for what had happened. She convinced her mother we could still get the house back if we proved you were incompetent. They wanted to hire a lawyer to drag you into court. That's when I finally found my spine. I refused. We fought for days. She threatened to take Michael and disappear again. I threatened to go to the police about the forged checks. We were at a standoff until I started having panic attacks, then couldn't sleep, then couldn't function at all. The doctor says it's severe anxiety and depression. Years of emotional abuse coming to a head. I see now what she did to both of us, Mom. I let her hurt you because I was too afraid of losing her again. I betrayed the one person who never betrayed me. I don't know if you can forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now, that I'm getting help, that I'm trying to be the son you deserve and the father Michael needs. Thank you for saving yourself, Mom, because in doing so, you may have saved me too. The letter fell from my hands as sobs racked my body. All the pain and loss of the past months crashed over me like a tidal wave, but mixed with it was something new, understanding. The pieces finally fit together, the full picture visible at last. My son hadn't betrayed me willingly. He'd been a victim too, caught in a web of manipulation so subtle he hadn't recognized it until it was almost too late. The realization didn't erase the hurt, but it transformed it, gave it context, made it something we might eventually heal from. When the tears subsided, I picked up my phone and dialed the number Lauren had left. It was time to see my son. Ridgeview Psychiatric Center stood on a gentle hill overlooking the Bakersfield suburbs, a modern building of glass and stone that looked more like a retreat than a hospital. The gardens surrounding it were meticulously maintained, bursting with late summer blooms that seemed at odds with the pain contained within those walls. I clutched my purse tightly as I followed a young nurse down a softly lit corridor. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it. What would Marcus look like? What would I say to him? The questions had kept me awake all night, rehearsing conversations that might never happen. "He's been doing much better this week," the nurse said kindly, perhaps noticing my nervous fidgeting. "When he heard you were coming, he actually smiled for the first time since admission." We stopped outside a door marked garden room. Through a small window, I could see a sunlit space filled with plants and comfortable-looking furniture. And there, sitting near a large window, was my son. The sight of him knocked the breath from my lungs. He looked thinner, paler, his usually well-groomed appearance replaced by disheveled hair and institutional clothing. But it was his eyes that struck me most. They seemed clearer somehow, more present than they'd been in years. "I'll give you some privacy," the nurse said, opening the door. "Just press that button if you need anything." Marcus stood as I entered, his movements cautious, uncertain. For a moment we just stared at each other across the room, decades of love and months of pain suspended in the space between us. "Mom," he finally said, his voice cracking on that single syllable. Something broke inside me then. I crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled him into my arms, feeling his body shudder against mine as we both began to cry. "I'm sorry," he sobbed against my shoulder, the words muffled but unmistakable. "I'm so sorry." "Shh," I soothed, stroking his hair as I had when he was a little boy with skinned knees or bad dreams. "It's all right now. We're going to be all right." We sat together on a small sofa, his hand clutching mine like a lifeline. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. Everything he remembered, everything he'd realized during therapy, the fog of manipulation gradually lifting to reveal the truth. "She isolated me so completely," he said, staring down at our intertwined fingers. "First from my friends, then from you. Made me dependent on her approval, her validation. The therapist says it's a classic pattern of emotional abuse, but I never saw it happening. Or maybe I didn't want to see it." "We see what we're prepared to see," I told him gently, "and love can blind us to so much." He nodded, his eyes filling with tears again. "When you sold the house, at first I was just shocked, angry, but then I found those letters, the ones I'd written when she left me the first time. Reading them was like waking up. I remembered who I used to be before her. I remembered how clear everything had seemed then." "That's why you started bringing my things back," I said softly. "The key, the recipe box." A small smile touched his lips. "I wanted you to know I was thinking about you, that I remembered, but I was too ashamed to face you directly. And Lauren, she was falling apart, threatening all kinds of things. I was trying to keep everything together until you couldn't anymore," I finished for him. He nodded, his expression haunted. "One night I just broke. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Ended up in the ER. They said it was a severe panic attack. But when they evaluated me further," he gestured vaguely at our surroundings. "And Lauren?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Marcus's face hardened slightly. "The court granted me temporary full custody of Michael while I'm in treatment. Her manipulation, the financial fraud with your accounts, it all came out during the evaluation. She's not well either, Mom. Not evil exactly, but broken in ways that hurt everyone around her. She's starting therapy too, but separately, away from us." The relief that flooded through me was almost painful in its intensity. Michael was safe. My son was healing. The web of manipulation was being dismantled, thread by poisonous thread. "Where is Michael now?" I asked. "With a court-approved caretaker, my friend David's mother. She's wonderful with him." His eyes met mine, uncertain. "I was hoping, when I get out of here next week, maybe we could—" "Stay with me," I finished without hesitation. "Both of you. My apartment is small, but we'll make it work until you're back on your feet." The gratitude in his eyes was almost unbearable. After everything I put you through? You'd still do that for us?" I squeezed his hand. "That's what family is, Marcus. Not a house or possessions or control. It's standing by each other, even through the darkest times." We talked for nearly 2 hours, laying plans, sharing memories, rebuilding bridges I'd feared were permanently burned. As visiting hours came to an end, Marcus walked me to the door of the garden room. "There's something I've been wondering," he said hesitantly. "That day, when you finally left, how did you find the strength to do it? To walk away from everything?" I considered the question carefully. I think I remembered who I was. Beneath the fear and confusion, there was still a woman who had raised a child alone, who had weathered widowhood, who had built a life on her own terms. Once I remembered her, I couldn't keep living as someone else. That was 6 months ago. Today I still live in my small apartment, but it's no longer silent or empty. Marcus and Michael share the pull-out sofa bed while we look for a larger place, something we can afford together, something that will be ours in a way my old house never truly was. Marcus found a new job teaching history at the local community college, a passion he'd abandoned years ago at Lauren's insistence that it didn't pay enough. Michael is flourishing in kindergarten, bringing home art projects that now decorate my formerly bare walls. Lauren remains at the periphery of our lives, supervised visits with Michael twice a month as she continues her own therapy. I don't hate her anymore. Pity has replaced anger. Understanding has softened judgment. She too was shaped by forces beyond her control. A narcissistic mother, an absent father, patterns of manipulation learned in childhood and perfected in adulthood. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings after Michael is asleep, Marcus and I sit on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the lights of Bakersfield twinkle below us. We talk about the future, about healing, about forgiveness, of others, and of ourselves. "Do you ever miss the house?" he asked me once, as we sipped tea under a star-filled sky. I thought about it, about the 68 years of memories contained within those walls. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but houses are just structures. The important things came with me." He nodded, understanding. "You know what's strange? I feel more at home in this tiny apartment than I ever did in that house, at least in the last few years." "That's because this is a home," I told him. That had become a prison for both of us. Yesterday, Michael brought home another drawing from school. This one showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of what looked like our apartment building. "My family" was written across the top in wobbly kindergarten letters. I pinned it to the refrigerator, right next to the first drawing he'd ever smuggled to me, the one of a gray-haired woman standing in a doorway, smiling, holding keys. Sometimes people ask what happened to my old house. I never give them the full story. It's too complex, too personal to share casually. Instead, I simply tell them what I've come to believe is the deeper truth. I locked the door and threw the key inside me, because that's what I did in the end. I closed the door on a chapter of my life where I was diminished, controlled, erased. I locked away the guilt and regret and what-ifs that might have consumed me, and I threw that key into the deepest part of myself, where it transformed into something else entirely. Strength, resilience, the courage to begin again. At 73, I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your power, your life. That sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself and for others is to say no more and walk away. That endings can become beginnings if you're brave enough to turn the page. Here in this small apartment, with my son healing beside me and my grandson growing strong and true, I found a peace I never knew in my grand old house on Maple Street. I've discovered that home isn't a place at all. It's the echo of a key turning in a lock, opening doors rather than closing them. Martha's journey reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim your power, your voice, and your life. When faced with betrayal from those she loved most, she found the courage to walk away, not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to be erased. What would you have done in Martha's shoes? Would you have had the strength to sell everything and start over at 73? Or would you have remained silent, hoping things might improve? Family should be our greatest source of love and security. But sometimes the most painful betrayals come from those closest to us. Martha's story teaches us that true strength isn't found in possessions or property, but in remembering who we are beneath the layers of doubt others place upon us. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes forgiveness comes after justice. And sometimes the key to freedom is locked inside ourselves all along. If Martha's story touched your heart today, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear this message of resilience and courage. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Remember, your support helps us continue giving voice to those who have been silenced. What part of Martha's story resonated with you most? Let us know in the comments below.